get stuffed crust?
Stuffed crust.
I'll stuff you all in the crust.
Hello and welcome to the All Good Stories podcast, where we believe all good stories belong to Jesus. And when we look for Jesus in the stories around us, we find him more fully in our own. We're your hosts, Chris Bowden
and Simon Campbell, two millennial dads who love pop culture and making connections from the content we love to the God who loves us.
And in episode 14, we're aiming to create some light bulb moments as we find the good stories in Despicable Me. All right, Simon, I am excited to jump into another animated movie in Despicable Me because I personally have little to no experience with what has become this movie franchise at all. I remember I saw this movie probably when it was in theaters back in 2010, and then I have just not touched it since. It has just not been in my sphere of influence at all.
Yeah, I think it's one for us that has come around a couple of times just because we are big Office fans, love Steve Carell, and the Minions, for whatever reason, captured the imaginations of some of my younger cousins and stuff. So that became like a running joke on one side of our family. And now I think there's just something about the humor and the heartfeltness of this movie and this series of movies that our family loves.
Well, Simon, if you can believe it, it is now 2024 at the time of this recording, which means this movie is 14 years old. And so, because it's easy to forget, take us back and remind us what Despicable Me is all about.
Despicable Me tells the story of Gru, a heartless supervillain with a penchant for elaborate schemes, plans to steal the moon, using a shrink ray device to secure his place as the greatest villain of all time. His plot takes an unexpected turn when he adopts three orphaned girls, Margot, Edith, and Agnes, who begin to thaw his icy heart, freeze-rayed heart, and challenge the value of his villainous ways. As Gru's plans are increasingly complicated by his growing affection for the girls and his rivalry with fellow villain Vector, he finds himself reevaluating his ambitions. This story combines humor, gadgets, minions, and heartwarming moments as Gru is overtaken by a more beautiful ambition and makes the transformation from being despicable to admirable.
Yeah, marketing man. You got it.
There we go.
So, made in 2010, this was the very first film for Illumination Studios, what has become a powerhouse of animation. They started with Despicable Me, which then became a franchise, including all the Minions sub-movies that are connected to that.
Yes.
You have the Dr. Seuss movies like The Lorax and The Grinch. You have Secret Life of Pets franchise, the Sing franchise. Then most recently, the Mario Brothers movie was made by Illumination. So all that to say, Illumination over the past 14 years has become quite the institution. And so I want you to take a guess here. Do you have any guess as to where the Despicable Me franchise ranks in the highest grossing animated film franchises of all time? If you take all animated film franchises ever, where do you think it falls in the lineup?
And this would be including Despicable Me and the Minions.
That's true.
I think we're up to like 7 movies now.
Is it 7 movies?
I think there's 3.
There's 4, right?
There's 4 the fourth one, and I think there's 3 Minion movies.
Wow. Oh, I had no idea.
Yeah, no,
they have whole area of the world.
Yeah, Steve Carell has. I don't know what his contract was, but it was a big one because he's done.
It's worked out
these.
well.
Yeah. Okay, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if it's in the top 10. I would be a little bit surprised if it's in the top 5.
So, Despicable Me is number 1.
What?
It is the highest grossing animated film franchise of all time.
Animated film. Okay.
Oh, okay. So I'm so sorry that did not interpret for you. I feel like it was like, this is a great reveal, and we deflated the balloon.
No. I mean, impressive in any category, but I was like, I'm a Lord of the Rings fan. That one has to be up there. Like,
yeah, that
top grossing.
I mean, like, it's got to be like Star Wars and Marvel, right?
Yeah.
Right? And then like Lord of the Rings. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
But in the world of animation, this is king. If you were to throw just your hat in the ring, do you have any other guesses of any more franchises that might make it into, say, the top 6 of animated film franchises?
Ooh, I don't know. Frozen might be in there.
It's good. Frozen's number 5.
Okay.
Frozen is number 5 on the list. You bet.
Shrek.
Oh, you did it. You found number 2.
Okay. Yeah, because there's enough of those. That's the ticket.
The top 6, it goes Despicable Me, followed by Shrek.
Okay.
Toy Story is in number 3.
That's the obvious. Yeah, okay.
Followed by this, I was like, this again, it's about like maybe quantity over quality. Probably.
Okay.
Like Ice Age rolls in at number 4.
Oh, you know what? I'm not surprised by that.
Yeah.
That actually works its way into our house, too. The girls call it a squirrel movie.
That is the kicker for kids. We have Scrat or Squirrel, which is great. And then to follow that theme, like you said, we've got Frozen coming in at 5.
Okay.
And then number 6, I think because it's probably going to include the remake, is The Lion King.
Really? Okay.
So The Lion King makes its way in at
Kung Fu
number
Panda
6.
would be in there too, because they've got bunch
it's in
of
the
those.
top 10. I think it makes its way in the top 10. But I think Lion King is going to include like Lion King 1. Technically, there's 2. Then there's Lion King 1.5, which Loki MVP. Go
what?
watch.
Really?
Oh,
I've never watched it. So
Lion King 1.5
I didn't
tells
give it
the
time.
backstory of Timon and Pumbaa as Lion King is happening as a movie. It's like all these other side things that they're doing while these other famous events of the movie are happening that you're familiar with. Like while Scar has his musical number, they are somehow in the background like doing things that have an influence somewhere. And like this is one of those, right?
That's
like
funny.
Kind of retconning some things with them. It's actually pretty funny. And then I'm assuming the remake of the creepily realistic Lion King is probably also bunched into that, which boosts it up to 6. So, all that to say, when this hit the box office, it cost $69 million to make, which is one of the lower budgets that we've had for animated movies that we've looked at. And it made $332 million domestically and $475 million internationally for a grand total of $808 million.
Wow.
Which is a lot of money for any movie, period. We are getting up to that $1 billion mark. And that is nearly 12 times its budget. 12 times its budget, which is a huge movie maker for the first film of a studio. Like this is the first thing they've made. And they have just
that's like a Pixar Toy Story move.
Yeah, all of a sudden, like, well, we got a lot to work with now.
Yeah. As
a, like, comparative that I looked up, Iron Man, which was the first MCU movie, which also in itself, I remember, was a big splash.
Deal.
Like, that was a big deal. That movie made just 4 times what its production budget was, which is just an interesting reference. Like, Iron Man, great, awesome, made a big deal 4 times. Despicable Me, 12 times. That just blows my mind.
I'm guessing Iron Man cost a little bit more.
Not by much.
Oh, really?
It did. Well, let me go back. Okay, about double. Totally wrong. Yeah, double that. 120 million. So on Rotten Tomatoes, if we look at this, it has an 80% critic score. It has an 83% audience score. So there's a pretty good consensus that we like this movie. This is a well-reviewed movie. This is a movie that has created such a cultural impact where you cannot go anywhere without escaping a minion somewhere. Even more so than the main character group. The movement of what Minions has become is just mind-blowing to me.
Yes.
And so this is a movie that has really cemented itself as a franchise in some of our culture that we're encountering, especially for young families that are inevitably at some point your kids are going to collide with Minions and you're going to have to navigate what that's going to be like for you and your family.
Navigating. It's true. But I think the magic for me about this movie, one of the things, I do think that this has like a little bit of an old cartoony feel because even with the physical comedy and stuff, you never really feel like anyone's in danger.
That's a great way of saying that. It's true. It's like they're going to be fine.
Yeah, they're going to be fine. And because of the just sort of absurd nature of the violence in a way, you don't really worry about anybody. So
that's great. Yeah,
I felt like that was a piece of magic.
Even the cartoon element for me that I'm just thinking of this in real time was when he gets a weapon in his hands, whether it's his what looks like a sun gun or his freeze ray gun.
Yes,
it does this ridiculous
just comes out
like
of nowhere. Yeah,
it's a gun and it's getting larger and it's larger. It's just like larger than life gun and boom, right? Like that is such a cartoony effect.
Yes,
and it is just over the top.
Little piece of movie magic, I think, is the way that they set up this movie, particularly with introducing Gru. They waste no time in showing us how despicable this person is. It's kind of like what's the method of like when a character like helps a cat and then you know that
you're
they're the good guy?
establishing that they're a good person.
Yeah.
It's like character establishment is the best thing I can come up with. I know there's a better term than that.
I know there's a phrase, but yeah, this is like the inverse of that, where you have the kid with the ice cream on the ground, and he makes the balloon animal, hands it to him, then pops it. It's like perfect. How despicable that is. Yeah.
And what I love is that it's despicable, and yet for most of the things that Gru does as a villain, they're like very safe things. They're things that are more like annoying or like small little cruelties, right?
Yeah.
Like, I love when he parallel parks in front of the store, and then they go the extra mile in all of these moments where it's like he pulls in the parking space to parallel park. There's the beat, and then he smashes the cars going back and forth. Like, it's not enough that he got his giant car to the spot. He's going to smash those other cars out of the way, which is just great. It leans into those despicable things in a way that is entertaining and still like not super evil, which I think is why Gru continues to be an endearing character. That was a little bit of my movie magic. He's a villain. He's a bad guy, but they navigated the tension so well of making him endearing or making the things that he does not actually like villainous in a way that makes him overly cruel. You still want to root for the guy. You still want to like the guy.
And I think that transformation, this anti-hero sort of character, is very unique in a kid's movie. We know he's the bad guy, but you watch his transformation, you sort of root for him. He becomes endearing throughout the course of the movie. I think that's a pretty unique move.
It is. It really subverts your expectations, especially for an animated movie. I think previously, if you'd look at Pixar or Disney or even DreamWorks, DreamWorks probably got to it first with Shrek, where you have a bit of your anti-hero of like, this is not the character you expect. But traditionally, we held to some very expected archetypes of movies for animation. And what I love is you lean on the fact that villains can be or are sometimes the most compelling part of an animated movie.
Yep.
I'm a big villain fan here. If I go back to Disney movies, I'm like, Jafar, the best.
Oh, yeah.
Scar, the best.
Yes.
Ursula, the best. There's something to them that makes them very compelling. Sometimes they have more character depth than the heroes do that they're creating. Like they have more motivation or you get why they're doing the things they're doing. And they get the best songs. Have you noticed this? Like,
they do.
I'm a sucker for anything with a minor tone to it, though. So like, I got a bias there.
Yeah,
but,
there you go.
Man, I could have a playlist of just like villain jams. Man, it's great.
I also think the magic that this like Gru accent voice character that Steve Carell has created, you sort of place the accent in a weird sort of Eastern European kind of thing, but then you also have his mom voiced by Julie Andrews, who's also doing some...
Stop. That's Julie Andrews?
Yeah.
Who plays his mom? Get out of here. For real?
For real.
They got Julie Andrews for this movie?
Yeah. She shows up in the successive ones too. Yeah.
That is awesome. I had no idea. Sorry, my brain is just trying to reconcile
what
that
will
detail.
Even blow your mind further is that Steve Carell voices like 3 different versions of Gru because he voices a child Gru at one point in this movie series where he changes his voice. He also voices a twin brother of Gru that we discover later. And so he has like all of these different voicings for the same character, same accent, and he does all of them. And
that's great.
Just as a Steve Carell fan, it's awesome.
Part of the movie magic for me was the soundtrack of this movie. That has a groove that you could like ride all day. There's just like this beat or this rhythm that's so good. And
Pharrell, man.
Yeah, so Pharrell Williams, his first kind of composing feature for him, his first step into that alongside, I think it's Edo Ferreira is the composer that I think worked alongside him to do the soundtrack. But man, there's magic to the things that Pharrell produces,
and
man.
It sets them
you can
apart
feel
a little bit from the other animating studios of like the different kinds of things that they bring in. I think if you look at some of the other Illumination stuff, even the Grinch, bringing in like Tyler the Creator to do the music for
I have not seen the Grinch movie either, so I got some catching up to do.
Christmas is coming, and we will do that one.
Nice plug. Well done.
The different versions of the Grinch. But yeah, I think that does kind of set them apart in terms of how they use and how they view the place of music in these animated movies.
On top of the Steve Carell of it all, I also wanted to acknowledge part of the movie magic for me was it finally clicking in my brain that Jason Segel is Vector.
Yes.
That, man.
Great
the
voicing
voice
there,
acting
too.
in this. Because eventually there was something he said at one point.
Yeah.
It finally clicked.
Yeah, you start hearing him a little bit.
He is so far removed from his voice throughout probably the whole movie. And then Dr. Nefario being played by Russell Brand. Again, you would not. If I did not see Russell Brand in the credits, I would not have attributed that to him. But then when I go back and listen, I'm like, that's brilliant.
Oh, Will Arnett is in this too, as the bank dad. Yeah. Yeah, he is.
This is great.
To do this as the studio's first movie, to get this collection of names,
they
pretty
had
great.
the right people. When you know
and what's
people.
that guy from 30 Rock?
Jack McBrayer. He is in this. He plays a few roles.
He plays a couple. Yeah, he plays a couple of them. So yeah, just a really interesting voice cast assembled for this.
The last piece of movie magic for me is, just like the Lego movie or some of my other favorite animated movies, I continued to be surprised throughout the movie by these little gags almost in the background that they would leave in the movie. The two that come to mind for me that were the funniest to me was the title of The Bank of Evil, but then underneath says formerly Lehman Brothers.
Yes. I hoped you caught that. That was going to be in my love it or leave it section. I knew if you caught it, it would be a love it for you. But
great. And then the other one for me, because I didn't notice it at first, but Vector has the pyramid behind his base, but painted as the sky. So it blends in. It was great because I didn't notice it at first. I looked, I went, oh my gosh, there's the pyramid.
It's really good.
That made me so happy. All right, Simon, that movie magic is fun. It's great to geek out on some of those details that are really fun for us. But what we're here to do is talk about what uniquely in this story belongs to Jesus. Where do we see his character, his story, the biblical narrative on display in a way that allows us to start having conversations about Jesus just as we watch films, and specifically here, Despicable Me. And the first one, for me, really is this idea that there is goodness in everyone. This idea that no one is really beyond Jesus. No one is beyond redemption, even villains. And for me, it was really clear, and Gru ultimately in his story lets the love of family in. Rather than his own aspirations, rather than his own ambitions, he's had a particular goal in mind most of his life.
I will be the greatest villain of all time!
And he ultimately ends up choosing what's better or what's best over what he previously thought was best. So you're not going to get to that in this movie, but it's choosing Jesus over whatever else is out there that you thought previously was most important. So he's given a new purpose. He sacrifices his plans for the sake of his kids, for their welfare instead. It made me think of Ezekiel 36:26. I'll give you a new heart and put a new spirit in you. I will remove from you your heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh. If you look at Gru at the start of this movie, it's freeze ray, right? Just get out of my way. I'm getting coffee. Yes. And then by the end, you still get that villainous humor. He's still a villain, right?
Yes.
But he's got this new heart in him as he reads not only the kitten book, but this unicorn book that he writes at the end that really kind of displays this renewed connection that he has to this family that has been created with him and these girls. And connected to that for me was just the reality of Romans 5:8. God demonstrates his own love for us in this: while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. This, is stretching out there, right? But if I were to look at a character like Gru, if I lived in the universe of that, they're oh, he's a villain, right? He's a bad dude. He's beyond caring about, he's beyond hope, he's beyond whatever. He froze me in the coffee line the other day, right? Screw that guy, you know? But then God goes, no, even him, even her.
Yes.
Even that person. Which, if you bring that back to our world and our context, you think about who are the villains of my world? Who are my enemies in my everyday life, right? And God tells us, don't just see your enemies, love your enemies. Go out of your way to see them and extend love to them. Because it's going to point to who I am.
Yes.
And I go, man, what a challenge. No one is beyond Jesus' message. No one's beyond God's love, even the villains of our world. If I would consider who the world has as real life villains for us in the world, and going even them.
Yes.
Even them. No, that is difficult to reconcile.
Yes. That possibility of that transformation from despicable to admirable, from despicable to redeemed. You're never so despicable that you're outside of the reach of God's redemption. And that's something that I think when we have a character that's so obviously despicable, so comically so, right? They make it painfully obvious, and to watch his transformation happen, that inspires hope for all who would consider themselves or find themselves in a place where they feel or seem despicable.
It's well said. If I were to choose a character that I draw out from the Bible that this made me think of, and it really just hit me real time. Here we go. You look at the conversion of Saul to Paul in the Bible.
Yeah.
On a dime, right? For him, right?
No, he goes from being the villain.
Yeah,
he was the New Testament
dude
super
rounding
villain.
Everybody up, right?
Yes, he's the super villain who not only diabolically opposed to the Christian message, but takes action to systematically, eradicate and persecute and kill.
Stories of this dude being the guy. Yeah.
Yes,
and then you get stories later when he's Paul. He suddenly has a testimony or a witness because of his previous story in a way that points to Jesus's transformation. Work. And so that's where I think we get into something that's really interesting and really valuable is, can you imagine the impact of the witness as someone's life is transformed by loving Jesus, what that story becomes for other people?
We all know stories of that. And the reason we do is because that's the kind of thing that Jesus does. That's the kind of thing that's the kind of 180. That's the kind of radical transformation that Christ does. And that's the new creation that 2 Corinthians 5 talks about. We are a new creation. The old is gone, the new has come, right? It's radical. It is completely opposite, right? It's all of those things. And I think that transition from being despicable to redeemed is something that absolutely belongs to Jesus. I love that you saw that in this too. One thing for me, something that Gru reminds me of Jesus is when he becomes this transition where he becomes a father to the fatherless, a defender of orphans.
Oh, you gotta take us to church. Okay, let's go.
So the adoption portrayal in this movie is meh.
I'm suddenly more concerned for the orphanages.
Yeah, I think like a lot of movies, whether you go to Disney classics, tons of them feature orphans.
Or all your main characters are about to become orphans in the first 15 minutes.
Yes, we see this over and over again. And the portrayal of the adoption application and like the problematic nature of, they can just come and take the girls back and reverse
my
all
favorite,
of those
least
things.
favorite moment of that being ridiculous was, well, you passed your background check. Like, what?
I think the reason that we see this as a theme over and over again, this idea of orphans, adoption, is because this state of being an orphan is so vulnerable. It is so sad and wrong. That's why it shows up in movies.
Man,
and it's
that word vulnerability, man. That's the one. Right?
Yeah, it is. And I think that that's something that we see in scriptures because throughout the Bible, God identifies himself as a father to the fatherless, a defender of orphans, widow, the foreigner, the poor. Psalm 68:5. I'm a father to the fatherless, a defender of widows is God in his holy dwelling. That's how he identifies himself. The encouragement through the prophet Isaiah in Isaiah 1, verse 17, seek justice, encourage the oppressed, defend the cause of the fatherless. There's a bunch of different places where this happens. So again and again, God identifies himself as that. And when Gru becomes this, there's a particular moment that I love that I'll get to. But the girls, the state that they're in is very vulnerable. They're orphans at Miss Hattie's Home for Girls. They're being exploited for the selling of these cookies. That's going into Miss Hattie's coffers, right? They're literally in a box of shame.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
What actually starts this process for Gru when he makes that shift to become a father to the fatherless, a defender of orphans, is at the carnival when he intends to just abandon them there. But then, this is so ironic. It's the injustice that the girls experience at the carnival. That's what lights his heart. That's what starts the process. And he's like, oh no, that's not how this works. And we see this magical moment.
Okay, my turn.
Where a villain stands up for justice. How crazy is that?
Yeah.
That's the moment where he faces up to this, minor injustice in the carnival. That's where we see him make the transition. That's when the montage happens and he comes home with the face paint and then we see this happen in him.
What I loved in that too, in the words of the girls, that was awesome. And then they say, let's go blow more games up. Because on the surface level, that was fun. That was cool. We got a prize. But it also is, you showed up for me. Like you saw me and you supported me. And not only is that the first step for Gru, it's also the first step for the girls of seeing there's a little something to this guy. Because previously, even for them in their experience, Margot's just trying to protect her sisters and going like, it'll be fine, it's whatever. Or saying like, he's never going to kiss his goodnight.
That is one of the things like, do you have my back? Do you stand up for me? Do you defend me? Do you protect me as your own, right? That is a deep need of all children, but especially children who are in these vulnerable situations, right? Like we see that in foster care stories and all that kind of stuff. Like those are the moments that like, wow, that was awesome. You have my back, right?
It's a moment of inordinate influence in a positive way.
Yes.
Right? Yeah.
So that's one of the things that I think belongs to Jesus is when Gru reminds me of Jesus here is when he becomes that defender of the girls and the father to the fatherless there.
One that I had to think belongs to Jesus is just how you respond to your kids matters. I think of Gru's very funny montage, but it's Gru's mom going through, look, I drew this rocket ship. I had made this prototype of a rocket. Then I made a real rocket based on the prototype. And that's funny, but oh man, that just like killed my heart. Because I think we all can relate to that feeling of being excited about something and being met with the shoulder shrug and then having to go like, oh, what do I do with that? What does that mean for me? And for you to get that from a parent is all the more heartbreaking. And oddly enough, it made me think of Proverbs 22:6, which was start children off in the way they should go. Even when they're old, they will not turn from it. And really that's talking about the way they should go in alignment with Jesus and his values and who God is and all these things. But what that inferred for me was that in whatever way you point them to go, they're not going to turn from that. Whatever your foundation is that you're building with your kids, positive or negative, is going to have a lasting effect. And I think we see that psychologically in all these studies and research that we've done with kids of like the inordinate influence that adults have on kids at a young age. And so like if that's Jesus, awesome. If that's the character of Jesus, that's so great. But also if it's insecurity, if it's the need to measure up, if it's filling in that gap that my parents create in one way or another, those are things that all of us have them and we will carry those into adulthood, or it's something that we need to become aware of and reconcile at some point in our developing lives because they've started us off in a certain direction. And even when we're older, it is hard for us to turn from those patterns and things that have been established in us. Like Gru's character, since the time he was little, it's like, I want to be an astronaut, I want to be an astronaut, I want to be an astronaut. So even his goal ultimately then as an adult is like, I'm going to steal the moon. That's the way he's then contextualized that for himself of how do I both be an astronaut but also get this affirmation that I'm seeking from my mom.
And I think that that was a unique layer to Gru's story that some could argue, who knows if it was necessary, but it definitely adds depth because it really contextualizes that his mission to steal the moon as tied to that relationship with his mom or whatever. And he's only seeking admiration. The reason he wants to steal the moon has nothing to do with the moon. It has everything to do with being admired as the greatest villain of all time. And because nothing that he did prior to this impressed his mom, he's not done anything that impressive.
Yeah, then he's faced with that again in a different way at the bank where they say to his face, you're too old, you haven't done enough, you haven't turned a profit, you've got these debts.
The problem is you.
That's the line. Love the idea, but not you.
And that's the thing that comes full circle at the end, which is why I think that the payoff at the end is even that much more satisfying because, yes, it fulfills this dream for the girls, but it also really fulfills this dream for Gru because his mom is sitting in there saying, I'm proud of you. You're a great father. So he's exchanged seeking this admiration and achieves it in a totally different way. One of the other things that I think belongs to Jesus in here is what motivates Gru's change is beauty. His transformation is motivated by beauty. What I mean by that is he's not guilted into this with the girls. He's not shamed into this. There's this montage song that Pharrell, I had the subtitles on while I watched it, in prep for this. But
Millennial Tell. Well done.
There you go. But the lyrics of that montage, while he's doing like the pancakes and the other things with the girls in the house, the lyrics are, what did you do? Everything's lost its worth to me. Everything in this world. You are the prettiest girls.
Whoa.
So the beauty of his girls, the beauty of this family, the beauty of what he's discovered here has caused everything else in his life to lose its worth. And that's what motivates his change.
And that's like almost word for word what Paul describes, right? I consider everything.
Oh my gosh, I was going right there.
You go.
Philippians 3:7. But whatever were gains to me, I now consider loss for the sake of Christ. What is more, I consider everything a loss because of the surpassing worth of knowing Jesus, my Lord, for whose sake I've lost all things. So it's not like he was guilted into giving up this dream of the moon. It was not that he was shamed into it. It was ultimately the beauty of his girls that motivated this transformation more. He's motivated by the beauty. He wants them more than the moon, right? Yep. So that's something that I thought belonged to Jesus, is just being motivated by the beauty. Because when you see the beauty of Jesus and what he has done for you and the beauty of what he's really calling you to, everything else does kind of like fade in its worth. Everything sort of fades in comparison.
Practically, if I think about the so what of it all, I'm sure you've had these moments. I know I have, where when I get centered up with Jesus, when I spend time with him, when I make the space for him that I need to, my perspective gets right-sized again. I am sometimes very quickly reminded of what is most important. And I get caught up in all sorts of things. And I have to come back to the basics again to be reminded of love God and love my neighbor and love my family. I got to love God, and then out of that, love all these other people that he's placed in my life, which just helps prioritize my job, my hobbies, my other relationships, my interests. It's like it just puts those in the right priority again. Yeah. That I think for us in the busy lives that we all tend to lead with all sorts of varying priorities filled with really good things. Honestly, a lot of the time, it is easy, whether it's ambitions or even our kids' ambitions or the dreams that we have for XYZ project, for us to sometimes get upside down on what's most important. And when we pause, he just does a really good job of being faithful and meeting us in those places to say, hey, me first. I've got you. I love you. I am what you need. I am enough. And out of that, now let's go pursue these relationships.
It's a little thing, but it's a spot in this movie that is a little detail that they included that I love, that I think belongs to Jesus, is when he's cleaning up after Dr. Nefario has called Miss Hattie and the girls have left. There's a little detail where they draw themselves at the bottom of the family tree.
Yes. Oh, and I'm so glad you brought this up. Keep going.
This has to belong to Jesus because we're adopted into this family tree on a spiritual level, right? The girls draw themselves into the family tree. We are grafted into God's family tree, and we are full sons and daughters. Jesus is the firstborn of many. He is the vine, we are the branches. Psalm 68:6 says, God places the lonely in families. He sets the prisoners free and gives them joy. We are adopted into God's family. And so I think when we see the girls kind of claiming that spot through their marker drawing on the wallpaper beneath the family tree, I think that that's something that belongs to Jesus, something that we can claim.
Here's the direction that I go with that I think is really fun. The imagery I love to picture is God has this perfectly articulated like family tree that's really pretty, of like the Trinity, maybe, however you want to look at that. Sure. And then you have all these messy like color marks of what is the human race.
Right.
Chaos doodles, of like all these lines and connections.
Doodles,
and it's crayon. And it's messy, and he goes, that's my family.
You look at the genealogy of Jesus in Matthew, that is a chaos doodle of a genealogy.
And whether it's like the beauty of like he leaves it as the crayon mess because he loves us as we are because of Jesus, or because of Jesus, that mess becomes this really clean, beautiful like family tree that we're connected to. Both of those images stand out in my mind. And then the second one for me that I was thinking about was there is a certain level of trust the girls have that makes them willing to draw it for themselves on the wall. And I wonder if we really put ourselves to the test, do we actually really believe that we're worth including ourselves in the family tree of God, right? Like if we placed ourselves there and we hear this truth all the time of like, you're in the family, you're in the family, you're in the family, and going, do I believe it? Do I trust it? Am I going to trust what God says enough to go like, yeah, me too, and put my name in crayon on the family tree, believing that I actually am connected to this? I think that is something that is very easy for us to say. And then the way that we actually like live that out or believe that internally is probably more disconnected than we would admit.
Yeah, well, it's because it's a miraculous thing. It's a miraculous thing that we get to claim our place as sons and daughters and full inheritors of the kingdom of God, right?
And
that is nuts.
There's beauty in that's how crazy that is, but also God saying, trust me. And I just so badly want all of us to be in a spot where I just trust that God loves me the way that he says that he does. And I can confidently, with joy and like goofy doodles, like add my name to the tree and be confident and trust that I'm meant to be right there. So those are a few ways that we think this story can uniquely belong to Jesus, where we see him working and moving and themes of who he is in Despicable Me. But you look at that all that and part of you always goes, so what? What am I actually going to do with that? What does that mean for me practically in my everyday life? So as we look to have spiritual conversations more and more in our everyday lives, thanks to the content that we're taking in, we'll say, hey, really practically, what might or what could that look like? And so, Simon, take it away, man. If we were to sit down and watch Despicable Me with your kids, how might we frame this up?
I mean, I think as you're looking at this movie, I think there's a really big opportunity for spiritual conversation just around the change that happens with Gru. Even just sitting with your kids, what do you think changed about Gru from the beginning to the end? What do you notice that's different about him? What do you think caused that? Just asking those curious questions and then just saying, you know what? It kind of reminds me about how Jesus changes everything in our lives. And when we choose to follow him, it doesn't matter where we come from or what we've done. No matter how despicable we've been, Jesus can change our heart. Jesus can transform, like the end of the little unicorn story, the 3 little kittens who changes his heart, right? Jesus changes our heart in a more powerful way. I think that change, whether you use those kind of prompts or questions with your kids, I think that change itself is an opportunity. And I think that there are some curious questions we can ask about that change that we can say, oh yeah, that reminds me of what Jesus does for us.
That's well said. Another big theme that we touched on was this idea of adoption, belonging to God's family. If we were to frame that up really practically as a conversation with our kids, how might you swing at that one?
You could be talking to do you know anyone who's adopted? And what do you think that means? Even just having that opportunity to say, and did you know that God has adopted us? Through what Jesus did, we get to be God's children. We get to be a part of his family forever. We become a part of God's forever family because of what Jesus has done for us. Just like your friend or whoever we know was adopted and is a part of that family forever. And then I would say, yeah, the the adoption of the girls is forever. It's forever. Adoption is forever. Right? So, just hit that one home on your way to that spiritual conversation.
That's great, good, man. And now we get to step into some love it or leave it. An opportunity for us to talk about what we loved and what we could have done without along the way. Or maybe just some hot takes.
Well, I've got a rapid fire here. So one of the things that I think is just kind of fun, but there's different levels to the love or potentially leave in this list, but there's tons of gadgets in this movie. And so I wanted to just go through a list with you and get your love it or leave it on me.
I am so excited and so upset that you have stolen this from me.
Oh, yes?
Yeah,
you have the list too? Okay,
I'm going to see where you go with this and then see if there's anything left for me to have.
So first on the list, love it or leave it, Boogie Robot.
For the gag alone in that's a huge love it for me. Having one of those that could jam on my desk during my workday when I need to pick it up, love it. Sold.
And I love how long it lasts.
It progresses.
And why are you so old?
It's the response line of that's so good. And for me, allowing the time for that joke to develop is great. Because as an audience at first, you don't get it. You're looking, you're like, what am I looking at here? And then slowly I think our brains pick up on cookie.
Okay,
I
said cookie robots. Yeah.
That's great. That's a full send. I love that.
So then in partnership with that, cookie robots, love it or leave it.
Love it. I mean, they're a little creepy. I mean, they got like, I'm like, oh, okay, that's a little haunting. But I think that's a love it just because it's so silly. It is so silly, but it's great.
The cookie robots for me is a spot where the animation shows its age a little bit. So like,
you felt that there. Okay,
I did.
I think for me, what made the cookie robots even more of a love it for me was the defect they have of sealing them in the vault. It's like they did their job so well
they did,
at the wrong time.
Yes.
Because again, it took me back to Looney Tunes of like, poor Wile E. Coyote. Just didn't quite work out.
Just the last 2% of his plan.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, fireball gun. I don't even know what to call that. He doesn't name it. He doesn't declare that weapon as he draws it.
Literally is like, I'm like, that's the sun. Like, this is going to be a problem.
Like a fusion weapon or something. Yeah, whatever.
Yeah, for me, I go, leave it. It's cool, but I'm like, it's a big gun. All right.
The big effect of it was great, but I agree with you. Okay, love it or leave it. I think this could go either way. Fart gun.
Oh, leave it. I am so hit and miss when it comes to potty humor, man. Sometimes I am like, yeah, full send. That was great. A well-placed fart joke, super good. I don't know. For some reason, like in this, that was a leave it for me.
Okay.
I was not in that. How about you?
Well, I'm on the fence, but the thing is it comes back. It keeps coming back in the future iterations of the franchise.
I don't know if that makes me love it or leave it more.
I
might leave it more then.
There are a couple places where I do love it. There's one part. I won't spoil too much, but there's a part where Dr. Nefario leaves, and so the minions give him a 21 fart gun salute. And then at the end, after these 7 fart guns fire 3 times, then he's like, I thought I heard 22. And it was because one of the minions next to him had farted. It was just
no. And again, I can't decide if I love that or leave that.
So
there's a part of my brain that's like, that's incredible. Another part of my brain that like runs for the hills.
The 21 fart gun salute by itself is kind of cringy, but the comment afterwards, oh, thought I heard 22. Like that's what gets it.
Oh, man.
Okay. Love it or leave it, Piranha Gun, the first weapon that Vector introduces.
That's a love it for me. I think that's a love it for me.
Okay.
Only because of how into it Vector is.
Yes.
His excitement about how good that is and knowing how stupid it is.
Yes.
It's what sells it so well. I think that's the kicker for me. Like, I'll sell the Piranha Gun. I'll jump on. I'll say I love that one.
I could leave the Piranha Gun, but I'm there for it with the Squid Launcher.
Okay, because I'm the opposite. The squid launcher, I'm like, ugh, too gross.
Much.
No thanks. But the only thing that was redeeming for me was like when Vector says we're gonna get the moon, steal the moon, and the squid like rolls its eyes.
Yes, that's the part.
That's the kicker.
The fact that the squid has character. That's what does it.
But then I'm conflicted that we're just shooting these things off like a gun. You know, like you gave it a soul, gave it a personality. All right.
Yeah. Okay. Love it or leave it. Freeze Ray.
Oh, love it. Haunts me a little bit if I think about it too much, but love it.
Okay, last one I think for gadgets. The anti-gravity serum.
Oh.
And how that keeps coming up with the floating minions.
I think the recurring gag is what sells it. I'm going to love it because we committed to the bit that one of them floated away and that it's okay. Because for me, that was a little distressing.
Right.
I was like, this is a nightmare. Like, this is
awful.
awful.
But again, it's like nobody ever worries about it. And Dr. Nefario said, oh, meant to close that. I'm sure it would be all right.
Again, Nefario sells it being okay. Like, I think he makes that good. Like, the bit there is great. So, Simon, you didn't steal all my thunder here.
Okay, all right.
Connected to this love it or leave it is, say you were a villain of your own. What weapon or gadget would you be making as a villain?
Oh, in this Looney Tune Despicable Me world, I would be definitely doing like a time pause.
Oh, time is the element you're going to work with.
I mean, if anybody asks me, like, what's the superpower you would want, it would be the ability to manipulate time. Because if you can pause time, you can effectively have super speed because you can get from point A to point B.
I've thought this through.
Right, I've thought this through. If you had the ability to freeze time, you could pause time, learn a new skill, master it, so then you become a master of whatever you want. I think time is the cheat code for superpowers in my mind, as is shown by the Marvel Universe and the multiple timelines.
You retcon whatever you want this way. It's great.
Yeah. What about you?
I have to channel my like inner third grader. Probably a jetpack would be the gadget.
Okay,
if we went serum, like then I would go, I won't fly, baby. Like that's the goal.
Got it.
But if it's like a gadget, it's jetpack all day. Like I want to be able to get around from A to B. I thought about that walking home from school all of my life, going, you know how much more efficient this would be if I could just fly over these houses and cut through all these backyards. Like that was the dream. Like could you imagine where I could go and what I could do if I could fly? Right? If I were a villain, what I want to do, flying on a jetpack, baby. And it sets itself up for plenty of gags and Looney Tunes moments if we're trying to make a jetpack work. So game on.
Love it or leave it, the Minionese, the very distinct sort of nonsense, but also like somewhat Spanish language that the minions speak at times.
Yeah, I feel like I'm saying this a lot, but this is a right down the middle for me. There are times where that Minionese, even Minions in general, I'm like, that's very funny. I think what's maybe ruined it for me is the larger cultural meme movement that like Minions have become. It's the stereotype of like, oh, my aunt posted a Bible verse on Facebook with a minion. oh no, like this isn't good. Or you
So-
see like grown adults wearing like a sarcastic Minion T-shirt
yep.
somewhere, and you're
So
like, what are you doing?
You're taking issue with the invasiveness of this.
Yeah, just how far we've stretched that and taken like what is a irreverent thing for kids and made it permission for adults to like, I don't know.
I think this might unlock something for you because I think that because the Looney Tune comparison that we've been making throughout, I think this is the same issue I have with Tweety Bird at sometimes.
Oh no. Yeah, because I feel the same thing about Tweety Bird. I'm like, why are we obsessed with Tweety Bird? And I'm sure that someone could call that out in me, being like, you just did the Lego movie, homie. But Minionese in general, I would say like there's moments where I'm like, that's very funny. That made me giggle. But other moments where I'm like, I do not need to waste my time with what the Minions are doing in the supermarket. Like, I get the gag. But I don't need us to spend the 3-minute cutaway of them going into a Walmart and goofing around trying to find a unicorn. I'm like, all right, leave it. Love it or leave it, the setup of this world where villains are just like a regular part of the deal. What I like about the world building here is it means that Vector is a villain and Gru is a villain, but there's more yet to be discovered potentially in this.
Oh, yeah.
And so love it or leave it, kind of the premise of the world that we're building. Because I think what's also inventive about that is you have suburban neighborhood and then villain house.
Yeah.
in the middle of it. So love it or leave it, kind of the vibe or aesthetic or kind of world building they're creating here.
I love it because it's so unique because like we have so many movies that have public superheroes. But in an inverse way, the world of Despicable Me, there's public supervillains. But they're not like opposed by superheroes. They're just in normal life, and they are supervillains in normal life. And I think that that's such a great little twist on the villain world that we get to see, and the aspiration to be the most despicable, have the most notoriety, I think is just kind of a good, pretty harmless way of like, oh, I just want to be the greatest supervillain of all time.
I love that there's like a competition aspect to that too, because most superheroes, like there's no competition aspect between the superheroes because they're superheroes, right? Yeah. Except for you get like Lego Batman, who's like, right. Superman, what? But other than that, like you don't have that dynamic in a superhero movie. And then we don't have to carry the burden that is secret identities in this either, which is really nice. Full ownership in who they are, publicly and privately.
Yes. And it's just kind of funny. You can't think about it too much because it's like, oh, if he's a known supervillain, but he lives in a suburb, like, you know what I mean? Like,
you don't play that out too far.
Right.
Remember, it's a kid's movie.
Exactly. But it works. And that is something that they carry through the rest of the movies that really does pay off. This whole villain
There's a world
world
we're building here. Yeah. That's awesome.
It's good. It's good. Love it or leave it, the inflatable pyramid opening, just that opening sequence, because it's not connected to any of the rest of the story besides the fact that the pyramid was stolen.
That is a love it for me.
Yeah.
I think because it captures a certain stereotype of American culture. When I think of like what other countries might think of Americans when we visit Europe or other places, I go, that's what we look and sound like. And so that was great. The icing on the cake is like the kid on a leash.
Yeah.
that was really good. And then the reveal of that is great. I didn't see that coming.
No.
Right? That it was going to be an inflatable. Great.
Yeah.
When he's falling, like somebody's going to save him. Something's going to happen. But he hits that and it's not real. Like, that's great.
Yes.
The kicker in that scene for me, though, is right after the scene when the news broadcaster is talking about it. And it does like the picture-in-picture zooms in. And they're trying to like blow the inflatable back up. The little air pump.
And then they go through the different national landmarks that everybody's trying to protect. And they get to the big beer. Oh, it was great.
Oh, the big beer in like probably Texas or whatever, right? And then you have the bird that flies through over the Great Wall of China that they like off screen
fire with tanks.
Yeah. And then what was the other? It was in Paris. Who's protecting the Eiffel Tower are mimes. That are just standing there with their arms crossed. Those are just enough subtle quips right there. I'm like, that's the best. That's the best. I love that. Those are my favorite parts of the movie.
I also really liked the newscaster kind of setting up the story through the newscaster. And then it also closes, the movie closes with that too.
Well, all good things must come to an end, including this episode.
Thanks again for joining us for episode 14. We hope this has been a fun one for you, but our greatest desire is that this is doing for you what it's doing for us, shaping the way we watch movies and sparking spiritual conversations around them.
And we would love to keep the conversation going with you because we know there's all sorts of other good stories and awesome nuances and apparently a lot more Despicable Me movies. And you can track us down to talk about your thoughts, insights, and questions on Instagram at All Good Stories Podcast. We would love to keep the conversation going and keep learning with you.
And remember, all good stories belong to Jesus.
And if you choose to give your story to Jesus, you can be sure he'll make it a good one.